Welcome to our 16th episode of Redeeming the Time. I am your host, Jake Wells. This is my dad, my co-host, Keith Wells, and we are glad you are joining us.
Yep.
You can reach us on all major platforms. If you'd like to contact the show, you can get to our email, redeemingthetimepod@gmail.com. So,
Very good. We've had comments over the last couple of weeks, different questions. That's been good.
Mm-hmm.
So how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. We're one. If you're watching this, you will already have known who won, but championship weekend's coming up. My guys are still in it, so it's good.
Yeah. I'm rooting for you.
We'll see.
I'm rooting for Purdue or NC State, whoever wins this game.
Yeah, nobody wants UConn to actually win,
And
except for
you
UConn
definitely
fans.
don't want Duke.
Yeah.
So, I think UConn's going to destroy Duke, but I think UConn's in. Duke's
They're not playing
in.
Duke. They're
Duke's
playing
not-
Alabama.
Sorry, Alabama.
Yeah.
My bad. I
Yeah,
just hate
Alabama
Duke
doesn't
so
have
much.
any defense.
So I saw a thing, the most hated players in March Madness, and the top three was Grayson Allen, Christian Laettner, and J.J. Redick.
Oh, J.J. Redick? Really?
Yep. So those three Dukies,
Yeah.
most hated.
Well.
So,
When you win, I guess.
or you're just a turd. So if you see something in the distance, you will hopefully find a Mandalorian Lego set.
Oh, our Easter egg. Did you know there's Easter eggs in, I think, all but one, if you even know what that term means. If you don't worry about it. But we have something hidden typically in the same spot, but not always.
And the one today is a Mandalorian Lego set. So in honor of that, let's talk about Star Wars today.
Oh.
And we won't get too nerdy yet. We'll
We
get
could.
nerdier later.
Yeah,
But-
I've spent a great deal of my life.
Well, they came out when you were a kid.
I was in first grade. My cousin, who had his T-top, what is that, a Camaro? He picked me up. He was 16, thought he was cool as could be, and he took me to see Star Wars. First movie I ever saw. I'm pretty sure I might have saw one before then, but yeah, he was cool as could be. That was cool as could be. I was the
You were
perfect
set.
age for the action figures. I mean, it just all, and then
Which we still have.
I still have my Kenner action figures, which they no longer exist, and I still have the guns because my mom made me take care of my toys. They're worth more than the action figures. And then the next set came out when you were in kindergarten, so like we've had that bond ever since. So that's sort of cool.
And Nana bought me the Millennium Falcon and
Yeah.
didn't get you.
My mom would refuse to get me the Millennium Falcon. I don't know why. Maybe because it's probably just expensive as a toy. And then then he gets it from my mom, of all people. And it was just as cool
It was
then as
very
it
cool.
is when I was a kid.
It's still
so,
cool.
Yeah.
But so for the sake of time here,
Yeah.
let's just, what is your favorite of this of any of the movies? Let's just go movies.
Experience or movie itself?
Both. Let's do both.
Okay. The coolest experience, this is when they still had midnight movies. I went to the midnight movies of the prequels, and
The second one.
it's in episode 2. I'm there at midnight with people dressed up. Not me. I was not dressed up. I don't go that far. People dressed up like this, and when Yoda walks in to fight Dooku, and he opens his robe,
Drops the cane. Yeah.
drops the cane, and the lightsaber just flies into his hand. You could hear an audible gasp. Yeah, all these nerds around me are like, and just everybody's cheering. It was the coolest movie event I've ever had in my entire life. Just because everybody was, we
So
were
nerdy,
We were
yeah.
so nerdy that we all loved it at the same time.
Yeah.
Movie wise, I couldn't tell you. I've watched
The fifth one, Empire Strikes Back.
Empire Strikes Back. Yeah, that's a great one.
That's regarded as the best.
I would agree. I like number 3.
The whole time you're like, don't go bad. Don't
Yeah,
go
yeah.
bad.
To see the culmination of
Yeah.
knowing who he's going to become and actually seeing him become that, and how Palpatine finally reveals who he truly is. His master scheme has come about, and the power of the dark side.
I think one of the coolest things, it kind of got ruined by the trailer, but in number 7, the 7th one with...
showing Han Solo?
No, that was in 8. Well, no, that wasn't 7.
Yeah, that was in 7.
But when Kylo Ren stops the laser with the Force.
Oh, that was cool, yeah.
Kind of got ruined by the trailer, but even in the trailer, like every time I see it, I'm like, it's the coolest thing ever.
It's just hovering there and making noise. Yeah, that was cool. That was cool. So I've watched all the cartoons. I've watched haven't done the comic books. I'm not into comic books, but I'm a big time nerd, and it's perfect. You go home for lunch. They're 20 minutes. You watch one while you eat. Yeah. So all right, back to actually stuff that matters in life.
Yep. So this week we've got 1 Kings 8 through 2 Kings 3. So we've got a lot.
We cover a lot. Yep.
And the first day, Monday, we've got 1 Kings.
We say that every week, don't we?
Well, it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like I read half the Bible.
Yeah, it's a lot of narrative.
1 Kings 8 and 9 today, where we have the chapter 8.
Monday.
Monday.
Okay.
We have the dedication of the temple. We'll see where the Ark of the Covenant is brought into the temple. And I found it very cool in verse 11 that the Lord fills the entire house with and they can't even stand in there.
Right, his Shekinah glory. That's right.
They can't even stand in there and minister. Very cool visual there.
Yeah, so Solomon's the king, and God didn't allow David to build the temple, but he allowed his son Solomon. By the way, if I sneeze today, allergies are killing me today, so I apologize if there's some weird noises coming out of me. So Solomon, he rehearses how the temple came to be with his father and him. And then verses 22 through 53, it's a pretty long chapter.
It's very long, yeah.
He goes into this great prayer of dedication.
Mm-hmm.
And what he does through this is he rehearses in front of all the people so they hear it, what God has done, where he's brought them from. And he reminds Israel that when they sin, they're going to be taken captive. And he talks about that. But if they will look to God and look to his temple, he will restore their land. And also verse 50, that the captors will have compassion on them. And God honors this prayer over and over again for the people.
Yeah.
He blesses the people. And then he uses, remember, peace offerings are those offerings that we have with the Lord and with those around us. And he 22,000 oxen, 120,000 sheep. He has a feast for 7 days there and sends them home, apparently with food, for another 7 days. So this massive, massive dedication of the temple of God, the amount of money that went into this, and just interesting.
Yeah. The takeaway for me with this chapter is the poetic language and all that with Solomon.
Yes.
You can kind of see why people were flocking to him.
Yeah,
he was very
without a
wise.
doubt.
All right, chapter 9, we see the Lord appearing to Solomon again, as he did in Gibeon, and
just reiterates
Yeah.
what he said before.
Yeah. With
And
the
then in verses 11 through 28, we get to see Solomon's energy toward building the kingdom. He's now 20 years into his kingdom, it tells us at this point.
took 20 years to build everything.
It took, 4 years to build the temple, 13 years to build his palace.
I thought it was 7 and 13.
7, you're right, I'm sorry. Yes. And 7 and 13. And then, so, he's around 20. It tells us he's 20 years into his reign. He finally gives Hiram some cities.
But Hiram doesn't like them, right?
No, he calls them, the word, he calls them Kabul, which means limited or sterile. So they must have been just good for nothing. But I know there's still this thing. Hiram gives them gold. He subdues the enemies within. Then we start to see now he starts to build a house for his Egyptian wife. Way too much connection with Egypt.
Pharaoh, yeah.
Egypt always represents the world in the Bible, and we see way too much connection here.
You get the fleet of ships for trade.
They go get him gold.
And you get the forced labor system too that he establishes.
So,
Yeah.
All right.
That's Monday.
Yep.
So we go into Tuesday, which is the next two chapters, 10 and 11, and we get the visit from the Queen of Sheba.
Yeah, Queen of Sheba.
She
This would be modern day Yemen, southern part of Arabia. So that's where about a 1,500-mile trip from.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's quite the
hears
trip.
so from there she hears the rumors of Solomon and
Yep.
wants to see if it's true, I guess.
Yeah.
And how wise he is and how prosperous he is. So she wants to test him.
Verse 2 of this, and she came to Jerusalem with a very great train with camels and that bear spices and very much gold and precious stones. And when she was come to Solomon, she communed with him of all that was in her heart. I never fail to think when I read this of Aladdin, Prince Ali, fabulous he. You know, he's down the street riding his elephants and all that. That's sort of what I think of when I see this. You know, he's in Agrabah, and the giant train coming in. But
With the genie singing.
yeah. So
She asks
go ahead.
She asks him a bunch of questions to see if he was actually as wise as people say he was, and he aces the test, basically.
Yeah, he answers everything she has.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Matthew 12:42. Jesus is showing the contrast of this encounter, saying that a greater than Solomon was here, speaking of himself. So he uses this as the picture of who Jesus was, who his true talent, what his wisdom was.
Yeah.
And so when we get there, we'll probably make that comparison again.
Then the rest of the chapter, we see the wealth and prosperity of Solomon. And
Did you notice how many talents of gold each year he got?
yeah.
666 talents of gold. So 666 every year. 6 is the number of man in the Bible, and this was Deuteronomy 17 told not to gather gold and silver.
Yeah, and he's getting horses from Egypt
Yeah.
in verse 28. In verse 23, I think it kind of sums it up. So King Solomon exceeded all the kings of the earth for riches and for wisdom.
But God told him that he was going to bless him that way. So it wasn't bad that he had these things. It's just how he goes about doing it.
Yeah.
Verse 27, made silver to be in Jerusalem as stones. There was so much wealth.
Yeah,
So-
everything was made of gold and silver. And
I guess the thing we see here is this is man at his highest. And Solomon is an example of the wisest, richest, yet we're going to see in a few minutes here, without God, he's miserable. You can be the owner of Amazon and Google and Microsoft and Tesla. You can be all of these people, but without God, miserable. And we see this with Solomon.
this chapter is basically a setup for chapter 11, in my opinion.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah.
So,
because in verse 11 it says, verse 10 goes through all of his riches, and then the first word of 11 is but.
yeah.
But King Solomon loved many strange women, and it goes down the list of everything that he was infatuated with women, 700 wives, 300 concubines, and those wives turned him to idolatry.
Turned his heart, it says, yeah.
He turns with Ashtaroth, Molech, and others. And
So he turns his heart from God here. He's got, 700 wives, 300 concubines, so 1,000 women. And I read something this week where, if you're not satisfied with the one person that God has given you, you're not going to be satisfied with 100 or 1,000. And when we see this, now the interesting thing is this is at the end of his reign. So he's an older man, but he's probably in his 50s at this point. I mean, he's not, in today's world, he's not that old. Once again, Deuteronomy 17, they weren't supposed to take a lot of wives. And the thing here is he was going after gods that were known for their fertility. The worst is with Molech. Child sacrifice was happening under him.
yeah.
Just a page before, we're reading about this great temple that he created.
Mm-hmm.
The wisest man that ever lived, God tells us that, and now he has subdued himself to just his carnal nature. And we see the results of this.
Yeah. Verses 11 through 13, we see that God will split the nation.
Yeah.
And this is the first part of, well, it's not the first mention of it, I don't think, but, and he will take,
it's the first mention. Yeah.
and he will take the nation out of his lineage. And
Yeah, it won't happen during his life because of his dad, because of David, but
Yeah.
it will happen during his son. And all but one of the tribes, really it's all but two of the tribes, Benjamin and Judah are sort of combined at this point. But just due to, and it's only because of the Davidic covenant. It's because of David. This is why I'm not taking everything.
It's not the last time that we see that because of David, God spares.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, another thing that happens here is toward the 20s verses there is past adversaries start to nip away. You know, he had subdued everybody when he was following the Lord, and it's amazing how those little side things start to nip away at us again when we're living in sin.
Yeah, I'd say it was the backstories of the villains.
Yeah.
Because it just goes one by one, like with Hadad from Edom, when Joab killed every dude.
Yeah, one's in the south, one's in the north.
Yeah.
We're getting you from every angle.
And then the last one being Jeroboam, who was one of Solomon's guys.
Yeah.
And obviously we'll see him
Yeah,
more.
so Jeroboam's going to be an interesting guy. We'll find out a little more here. Verses 26 through 40, his name means, may the people be great. And this prophet, God sends a prophet named Ahijah. And Ahijah goes up to him and in real dramatic fashion tells him that the tribes are going to be, takes this...
Gives him 10. And
gives him 10 of them and says that you're going to have these. Well, Solomon finds out. Solomon tries to kill him. God promises, now, if you do this, Jeroboam, if you follow me, I'll establish you like David. And we see David followed God and was established. You know, they both are going to follow a king that didn't follow God. David didn't follow Saul. He did follow God. Now we have Jeroboam that's going to follow King Solomon that didn't follow God at the end of his life, but he won't either. And so God doesn't establish, and he leads to his own demise.
Yeah.
But a question to you. Didn't ask you this ahead of time. Do you think Solomon turned back to the Lord? That's sort of a trick question, but we don't read it here. He just dies.
Yeah.
Doesn't mention it in this account. Now, I think if you read Ecclesiastes, I didn't let you answer the question.
Well, you were about to answer it. So I was gonna
I'm not going to answer. I'm just giving my opinion because we don't know for sure.
I'm not familiar with Ecclesiastes. I'm not as familiar with that, so I don't.
He seems to repent toward the end of Ecclesiastes, which was written when he was an old man. Most people believe.
Okay.
So, but to what degree we don't know. Apparently, the damage was done, though.
Question for you.
Oh, very good.
So it says the rest of the book, rest of his acts were written in the book of Solomon, or the acts, or written in the book of the Acts of Solomon. Is that Proverbs? What is?
No, it's a book we don't have.
Okay, because later on it says the books of Chronicles. All these kings, what the acts of them went into the book of Chronicles,
Yeah,
but I didn't know.
We don't have it. Yeah.
All right. So,
Yeah.
and then at the end we see Rehoboam. He's gonna be the next king of Judah.
Right.
Well, he's gonna be. Well, not yet, but he will be the king of Judah.
Yeah. So 1 Kings 12 is now.
So now we're into Wednesday.
What chapters are that?
12 through 14.
12 through 14. So Rehoboam, a lot happens during these 3 chapters that will have ramifications through the rest of the Old Testament. Everything from now on is just this major thing that occurs. So Solomon, who is the wisest king that's ever lived, now has a son, Rehoboam, which, by the way, is the only one of his sons mentioned in Scripture. 1,000 wives and only one son is mentioned. Okay. But Rehoboam is like, he shows no wisdom at all.
Yeah, the first thing is
It's the complete opposite.
Yeah, he forsook the counsel of the old man, right?
Right.
and he goes with the guys that he grew up with,
Right.
and with their advice.
So Jeroboam, who ran away from Solomon, because Solomon knew, just like with King Saul, was trying to kill David, Solomon was trying to kill Jeroboam because he knew he was going to be the next anointed king. So Jeroboam goes down into Egypt. And unfortunately, while he's down there, we're going to see he gets a few of their ways. But he comes back, and they go up to Rehoboam, and they said, your dad, he caused us to work really, really hard, a lot of burden. Will you lighten our load just a little bit?
Yeah.
He says, come back to me in 3 days. And he asks the old men that were his father's counselors, the counselors of the wisest man on earth.
Yeah, they've got to be pretty wise.
Okay. And then he asks his buddies that he grew up with. I mean, this is like LeBron, asking
Kyrie.
should he leave Cleveland and go down to, I mean, that's a silly analogy, but sports folks get that. And he listens to his buddies, and he tells them, you think my dad was tough? I'm going to be even worse on you.
Yeah.
And
Chastise you with scorpions.
yes. And they say, okay. Now, verse 26, now shall the kingdom return to the house. Oh, I'm sorry, crud. That's the wrong verse. Then they decide to split, and they all go back, and they start to follow Jeroboam.
10 of them, 10 of the tribes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Jeroboam sets up his own thing. He goes out to fight them, and God says, don't do it. And he listens at least.
At the one time he does.
Yeah.
And he makes 2 golden calves to worship.
Jeroboam does. Yes.
Jeroboam does.
So
yeah.
let's stop here for a second. So now we're going to have the 2 splits, and you've heard me say this if you've been in the church services here. You have the northern kingdom of 10 tribes known as Israel. So anytime from here on out you hear Israel, it is speaking of the 10 northern tribes. And the 2 southern tribes of Judah and Benjamin, mostly Judah, but it's going to be called Judah. So that's the southern kingdom. And now you're going to see a king in the north and a king in the south. And they'll reign at different times because different lengths of time that they'll reign. So we'll see this back and forth of who was reigning and what year and all that kind of stuff as we go on. So Jeroboam, he straight out of the gate fails.
Yep.
Verse 26. This was a verse I was saying before. He's a wimp, and he thinks that the people aren't going to follow him, even though God told him, "I'll set you up." And he says, "Now shall the kingdom return to the house of David." So he's afraid when they go to worship, they're going to go, "Oh, we got to go to Jerusalem to worship." And when they do that, they're going to be drawn to Judah and will leave him as king. So out of insecurity, he sets up these 2 golden calves.
Yeah, and look at his excuses for that, which is completely. He fails right away.
Right.
Basically.
He fails right away. And verse 30 says, "And this thing became a sin." It became a sin to the people. He sets up one in Bethel and then Dan up in the north. Remember how Dan was already following an idol with that ephod that we looked at back in Judges. So we're starting to see this. And then verse 33 to end that.
Yeah,
he gets priests just from anywhere. He's not using the Levites. We're going to read later that the Levites, they're leaving. They're heading down south. They're getting out of Dodge. And verse 33 says, it says there that the things which he had devised of his own heart. He's just making this up as he goes along. And as Christians, we don't get to pick and choose when we want to serve the Lord, how we want to worship the Lord. The Lord tells us these things. Religion, being a man-made thing at its core, is bound for failure.
Yeah.
So,
I thought you're in verse 28. He says, "It is too much for you to go to Jerusalem. Behold thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt."
yeah.
He gives credit to these gods that he made up. It's a sinful pattern that we'll see over and over.
Yeah, it becomes over and over they'll say he failed in the way of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. It just over and over, it just keeps saying that because they're followed after this idol.
Now, chapter 13, we have this unknown, unnamed prophet in this chapter, and he's sent by God to prophesy against Jeroboam's altar. And he mentions Josiah here.
Yeah.
By name. It will bring justice to the situation and offer out And Jeroboam's obviously not happy about this, and he tries to seize the prophet. And his hand, when he reaches out to touch him, his hand withers, which is a very cool visual.
And he can't pull it back in. Yes.
Yeah. And Jeroboam's like, well, can you heal it? And he's saying, oh, he's actually asking him to pray to God to heal it, and the prophet does. And
yeah. So this guy.
I just thought that was a very interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and the whole situation with this guy. God says, go there, do this, come back, don't eat, don't drink, just go there, and he uses. Why God gives him the name of Josiah? It's 340 years before Josiah will reign as king, and 2 Kings 23. We'll see this again, and the altar breaks, and his hand withers, like you said. They're very interesting.
So then Jeroboam wants to give him a reward, and he
does he?
It says it.
Yeah, but I think he's trying to manipulate the situation.
Okay, well, yeah. He says, "Come home with me and refresh thyself, and I will give thee a reward."
Yeah,
so
I think he's
whatever he wants them to come back with him, but the prophet says that he can't because the Lord commanded him not to eat or drink.
Yeah, what's up with that?
I don't know.
This whole account is so odd.
The rest of the chapter is very odd to me.
I've read this, over my lifetime, and every time I'm like, why is that in there? Because this guy. This prophet, he's not named, he's told to go, and then when there's a prophet in Samaria hears about it,
this older prophet,
he says, give me my donkey and let me go out to him, and he says, oh no, the man says to him, no, God said don't eat, don't drink, I've got to say my message and come home. And the guy lies to him and says, oh no, God, an angel just came to me and said, it's okay now, you can come and I'll refresh you. And he's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then he goes.
He eats.
And while he's eating, the guy looks at him and has a true prophecy from God now and says, you're going to die the minute you leave here. And sure enough.
He's mauled by a lion.
Well, he's just killed by the lion. The lion doesn't even eat him.
Yeah.
Doesn't kill his donkey, doesn't kill him. Just sits there and stands until someone finds him, knowing that it is of God at that point that this occurs. And the two things I can think from this is, one, when God tells us something, God doesn't change his mind. I mean, God is
somebody else's vision or whatever is not.
Right. If the word of God is clear on something, we have the full revelation of God. So if someone comes into you and tells you that something has changed, God changed his mind on what he meant about this, no, he doesn't. He's immutable.
And God is not the author of confusion.
Well, exactly. And then the second thing I see from that is God he corrects his own just as much as he does the wicked.
Yeah.
And those are the things that I get from this. I'm sure there's many others, and you can share those in the comments if you'd like with us. But
and then at the end of the chapter, Jeroboam continues to sin.
Yeah.
And making low people priests. And it says, and he became one of the priests of the high places. Does he make himself a priest?
Yeah, he makes even himself a priest, yeah.
Man alive.
God gives him a chance to repent, and he doesn't do that. He's given an opportunity now, and he doesn't do so.
So now we get into chapter 14.
Yeah, here I'd like to start saying, Israel, Judah, so north, south. So we start this chapter in the north with Jeroboam. He sends his wife. Apparently his child is about ready to die. It's not his only child, but he's got a son that's sick, so he knows he's not following the Lord, so he tells his wife to be disguised.
To Abijah.
To a guy that can barely see anyway.
Yeah.
It's sort of funny. But Ahijah is warned of God that she's disguised and tells her, nope, the kid's going to die. The minute you go home and walk through the door, he's going to die, and the kingdom is going to be taken from you. I would have given you this kingdom like David, but you didn't do it. Listen to me, and, it's going to be taken from you after your son because of the sins of Jeroboam. We start to see this over and over again. And also, verses 14 through 16 is interesting. There's a prophecy of the future of the Assyrians that will eventually take over. This is like 300 years in advance type prophecy, or about 250 years in advance type prophecy. So here we have verses 19 through 22. Jeroboam reigned 22 years, and then next is going to be Nadab, his son. And then we shift now to the south.
Yeah. Yeah, we go to Judah.
Yeah, now we're in Judah, verse 21. We start in Judah.
And they were setting up idols and building up altars to other gods as well. And Shishak from Egypt comes and raids the city, takes all the riches and the gold that we find in chapter 10 of Solomon with the golden shields and everything, and he takes those. Yeah. And he just raids the city.
Yeah, there's a lesson to be learned here. Well, Rehoboam's mom is an Ammonite, so I mean, he's following after mom's footsteps instead of his dad's. According to the abominations of the nations which the Lord cast out, it says.
Yeah.
And then here's what. So remember, David had made shields, some 500 shields of gold, and put them in his house and in his palace, and so Shishak comes up there and he steals all the gold out of the temple and steals it out of the palaces. And this is an interesting thing. What does Rehoboam do? He
makes
brass
ones.
So it's still shiny. He's trying. I always think of this. He's trying to keep up appearances. I want people to still think I'm a big shot. And this happens early. I think it's like in his 4th year of his reign that this occurs. Chronicles will give you more details on this, but this is interesting. But he dies, and Abijam, his son, reigns in his place.
Yep.
And there's sort of war between the two of them at that point.
Yeah, and in verse 30,
between Israel and Judah.
All their days, Rehoboam and Jeroboam had war.
Yes.
So now we get into Thursday, 1 Kings 15 through 17. And Abijam's reign we see that it is in the 18th year of Jeroboam. So this is where you see the different year with the different kings. Cause
we'll talk about that eventually, because there's some weird numbering systems how this works.
Yeah, and Abijam, he did evil in the sight of the Lord, and just like his dad.
Yeah, he only reigns 3 years.
Yeah, and from here on out, I think this is fast paced. Like there's a lot of kings that are said, and
some details are given more in Chronicles. Because we're going to rehash this again when we get to Chronicles, but we don't want to tell you what's in Chronicles now, because then we won't have anything to talk about when we get there.
Yeah.
Now, it's one thing I will point out here is he's called Abijam here because he's not following the Lord. There was a period that he did some things for the Lord. Abijam was like after a Canaanite god. He's called Abijah in Chronicles, which means Jehovah is my father. So when he's serving the Lord, the Lord uses that terminology here. So
I saw in verse 4 and 5, it says, nevertheless, because of David, God spared them. Yeah. Again, we see because David walked with the Lord all of his days. And then it says, except for the one matter of Uriah. Yeah. So all of his days he followed, but that one mistake. Yeah. And we've already talked about that.
Yeah. So he dies, and his son Asa,
who was one of the best kings.
Yeah, 41 years. So we're still in Judah. So we've had Rehoboam, Abijam, Asa.
And he restores the kingdom here to serve the Lord. And he does it kind of radically. He removes his mom from being queen because
go ahead. She's actually his grandma. It's just sort of a title. It says it's like the mother position in the end there.
Yeah. So he gets rid of her because she puts an idol. She makes a grove with idols and stuff.
Yeah.
And
he removes all the idols. He removes. It says the sodomites there, which is more than just homosexual men. This means these were temple prostitutes, both male and female. He removes them, and he removes
his mom,
grandma there from that position.
In verse 14, it says, but the high place, and nevertheless, Asa's heart was perfect with the Lord all his days. Yeah. And that kind of sums up Asa. But we'll continue talking about him. But
so he does make one mistake here, and you might call it a mistake, you might not call it a mistake. But so instead of relying on God, so Israel starts to attack. They're coming south, and they start to attack. It's 10 tribes versus 2. Judah's a big tribe, but still. So Syria is on their side as well with Israel. So he sends a bunch of money up to Syria and says, hey, turn on them and help us out.
Ben-Hadad.
Yeah, so instead of relying on them, he does this. And they stop attacking, and we'll see this in Chronicles, but he ends the reign. He's diseased in his feet.
What does that mean?
He probably had something like gout or maybe something from...
Arthritis?
No, it's probably... Yeah, it might have been, but it was more likely something from... people get diabetes or something of that nature.
Yeah.
So
he died.
Most people think he co-reigned with his son Jehoshaphat for a few years during that time, and then Jehoshaphat takes over. So Jehoshaphat's his son, and he follows the Lord as well. So then we shift back north.
Yep, get a sneak peek of what's going on up in Israel.
In verses 25 through 34, and Nadab, he only reigns for 2 years, and he's killed by Baasha. And Baasha was a general, kills all of Jeroboam's family.
Fulfilling the prophecy.
Of Ahijah.
That's
right. And Baasha now reigns for 24 years doing evil. So we have Jeroboam in the north, his son Nadab, and now Baasha, and Baasha is the same thing. God says, if you follow me,
yeah,
I'm gonna set you up. So he gives him an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And we get to...
He doesn't.
He doesn't. Chapter 16. We're still in Israel, and there's no stability here.
This reminds me of like a Roman thing where like people...
It does.
Because Zimri reigns for... We'll see that he reigns for 7 days.
Yeah.
But Jehu gives Baasha the same prophecy as Ahijah gave because of where he will wipe everybody out of his family, which I thought was interesting.
Because Baasha's not following the Lord, right?
Yeah, and so then Baasha dies, and his son Elah reigns.
For 2 years.
2 years, and then Zimri, he conspires against him.
One of his men, one of the captains.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he... Elah is drunk, and Zimri kills him.
7 days he reigns.
And in those 7 days, he fulfills Wait. Does he destroy the house of Baasha?
No.
Okay.
Zimri does.
Yeah, Zimri
He kills
does.
all the men.
He fulfills the prophecy. Whatever. And then Omri comes and catches wind of the treason that Zimri did and takes over the people, takes over that city where he was in, Tirzah, and
but the people are... There's another guy that's a general too named Tibni. So now there's this fight between Omri and Tibni.
So many names.
And Omri wins.
Yeah.
And he reigns for 12 years. And verse 25 says he wrought evil and did worse than all before him. So Jeroboam wasn't good. Neither was Baasha. Neither was, any of them. But he's the worst so far.
Yeah. In Zimri, he's a coward. Because he goes off and kills himself.
Yeah, he burns the house down and
he's a coward.
Allows himself to be burned. So in the north, we've got Jeroboam, Nadab, his son, killed by Baasha. Baasha's in there, his son Elah, killed by Zimri. Zimri kills himself. Omri and this guy for Tibni, which didn't last for any time. So Omri is now king.
And he reigns for 12 years.
Yes. And he has a son named Ahab. And now we stop for a while when we sort of tell some stories about Ahab.
And Ahab reigns for 22 years. And so...
Did evil in the sight of the Lord above all that were before him, is what the Bible tells us.
So Omri takes it to a whole nother level.
Yes.
And then Ahab comes and takes it to a whole nother level off of what Omri did.
Yeah, Ahab takes it to another level because in the world's eyes, they would think Ahab was a good king because he does some stuff to politically advance the country.
Yeah.
Spiritually, wicked as could be. And he's wicked because he marries this Zidonian princess named
Jezebel.
And Jezebel brings with her Baal worship. So she brings back Baal worship that was way before. and now bringing this back in. So it's not just the golden calf, which when we didn't really mention this during those golden calves. There was some symbolism. Jeroboam was worshiping God, but he was doing it his way through this idol. All right, so he was mixing the religion. Here, she's like, no.
Baal.
Yeah. Kick out God, bring in Baal.
Wicked.
Right. So there's a difference here.
In verse 33, I thought Ahab did more to provoke the Lord God of Israel to anger than all the kings of Israel that were before him. To provoke the Lord.
Yeah, right.
He was evil.
And if you like prophecy stuff, verse 34 is an interesting one. The city of Jericho is rebuilt.
Joshua 6:26.
Yeah, go back and look at that, and we won't talk about that. But that's interesting.
Yeah.
And now we're introduced to a new phase. In chapter 17,
we meet Elijah.
Yeah, so now we've come to the prophets that do miracles. This is a new stage. We see the same pattern happens in the Old Testament and the New Testament. We have the direct Word of God, where He's speaking to people, and then we have the prophets, and we have miracles. And now we see this here with Elijah, who means Yahweh is my God, and He will be someone that will do miracles. And I think it's because when you're completely void of the Word of God, there needs to be this sign that validates the message of the messenger. And they have gotten to such a point where they're just not listening, and there's no priest of God up there talking anymore. It's these prophets of Baal. She's hunting them. We're going to find out. She's hunting them down and killing them.
Yeah. So in 17, because of Ahab's wickedness, he announces a drought.
Right.
Which will last 3.5 years. And
why do you think a drought?
Because
Baal worship.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because the Baal worship was putting you on the spot like that. I'm sorry.
No, for me, I think it's. I immediately thought that when you don't have food, you look for more than just physical things.
And the Baal worship was, he's this god of fertility and for the crops to grow and things of that nature. So
why don't you have food?
If he's so great, why isn't it raining? Why aren't you? Yeah, that kind of thing.
So there's a famine going on, and Elijah is being taken care of by God next to the Jordan River. God sends ravens to with food and taking care of him and nourishing him.
It's just sort of gross.
Yeah, it is. Well, I mean,
he's an unclean animal too, but yet he's.
I don't think Elijah cares.
And he's going into the land of the Gentiles. There's got to be some symbolism there, but I don't know what it all would be.
He's kind of he kind of just doesn't care,
he's a tough dude.
Yeah. You'll see the description of him later on. And so the river dries up, so then God directs him to Zarephath to meet a widow here.
Which is a Gentile land still.
Yeah, and now this account is mentioned in Luke 4:25 by Jesus.
Yeah.
And he comes back, and that's a cool study if you want to look at that a little bit with the morsel. Shout out Scott for that. Yeah. But the woman agrees and obeys to feed Elijah, even though she didn't have enough to... the
whole cruse of oil and barrel of meal never goes empty.
Yeah, and it doesn't. And then we see her son comes down with an illness and dies. And the woman then questions Elijah and asks him to do something.
Well, she sort of blames him.
Yeah.
And then she sort of blames... She doesn't just sort of. She blames him for bringing up a sin in her life. So... she's been haunted by something. That's not how God works in our life. And I've seen this in other folks' life, and we all do this. We've made some error in our life, or we've just flat sinned in our life, omission or commission, and we think God's up there with a hammer, waiting to just find the right time to hammer, nail us. And that's not the grace of God.
No.
The grace of God forgives us,
Yeah.
and He's not looking for an opportunity to torture us or anything like that. But God uses this opportunity, and Elijah raises the son from the dead. This is the first person raised from the dead, by the way, in Scripture.
Yeah, he prays over the son. He is revived, and it says at the end that she knew that he was the man of God after that.
Which, once again, the miracle's validating the messenger of the time. Especially for a Gentile, this would have validated the God of Israel to her. She was probably worshiping some pagan god at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So now we have the famous chapter.
Now we're into Friday.
Yeah.
We got 18 through 20 today.
Elijah and the prophets of Baal up on Mount Carmel. I had the opportunity to go to Mount Carmel, and actually I got to do a devotion up there.
Oh, that's cool.
It was cool. And there's this chapel to the side, and you go up on the roof, and you can walk on this rooftop, and they've got arrows pointing to different spots. It looks over the Megiddo Valley, the spot where Armageddon, the Battle of Armageddon, is going to occur. And there's an Air Force base down there. All the planes are underground, and they bring them up and they take off.
That's very cool.
But there's this giant statue of Elijah with his foot on the head of a prophet of Baal, and he's standing there like he's preaching. Or no, he's got a sword in his hand.
Yeah, because
he's got a sword in his hand. It's a cool statue. I took a million pictures of it. And
Getch also preached on this account at the revival.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
and Alive.
Yeah,
I encourage you to check it out if you were not here.
Yeah, it's on our website. You can watch that.
So, God tells Elijah to go to Ahab and tell him that there will be rain.
Mm-hmm.
And then it cuts to Ahab and Obadiah. And
Yeah.
Obadiah was the guy. So this is where we find out that Jezebel was killing prophets. Yeah. And Obadiah saved 100 of them by putting them in a cave and feeding them. And
yeah, how did someone not tell on him?
Yeah,
it's hard. Only God would have kept that from occurring.
Yeah.
Now there's 13 Obadiahs in the Old Testament. Is this the Obadiah that wrote the book of Obadiah? Probably not. There's 2 of them that are in Judah, one with King Jehoshaphat. Later, King Josiah will have one. There's one after the captivity with Nehemiah. But his name means servant or worshiper of Yahweh. Go ahead.
Yeah, so Ahab wants to find grass to keep their cattle alive, and so he sends Obadiah one way, and he goes the other way to try and find food, basically.
Yeah, because there's not been water for 3.5 years.
Yeah, so Obadiah, while he's searching, the Lord intervenes here and has Obadiah and Elijah meet when he's out there, and I found this funny. So Elijah tells Obadiah to tell Ahab and that Elijah is here and that he's coming. And you see Obadiah freaking out.
You're going to leave and I'm going to be dead.
He says 3 times, like, he will kill me. Don't you know that he will kill me? If you don't show up, he's going to kill me. And then Elijah's response is one verse. He says, I will appear to him today. Like, stop freaking out.
Just go do it.
Just go do it. And which negates Obadiah's entire argument. And then
verses 17 and 18, I love it. So he finally shows himself to the king. And look what Ahab says, art thou he that troubleth Israel?
Yeah.
No,
are.
I'm not. You're the guy. You've been following after Baal.
I have not troubled Israel, but thou.
And this is the thought in today's world, though, too. Everybody, it's because of you. You hate people that are doing this and that. We don't hate people. Christians don't. We don't hate people. Just because we're sharing truth from the Word of God does not mean we're being hateful. It means we're trying to help you in your sin, and that's not how it's looked.
No,
and that's how it doesn't. This king doesn't see it that way either. You're not letting me do what I want to do, how I want to do it. Therefore, you're hateful.
Yeah.
And go to any college campus, and you'll see people cowering in the corner in the fetal position because they were told no for the first time in their life, apparently. And I'll get off that. Okay, go.
So then Elijah challenges, this is the challenge of Baal versus God here. And he says...
the famous phrase.
Go ahead.
How long halt ye between 2 opinions? He says to all the people, There's 450 prophets of Baal and him. How long halt you between two opinions? And the people don't say a word.
Yeah. And so he sets, they'll offer a sacrifice, get it ready, and the God will have to make the fire for the sacrifice, and the prophets of Baal go first.
Yeah.
And they start praying all morning, dancing, doing all these crazy,
yeah.
They're doing all this crazy stuff, and they hear nothing, and nothing happens. And Elijah, he mocks them here.
That's good stuff.
Humor. There's humor in the Bible here.
He is a sarcastic man.
Yeah. He says, maybe that Baal's busy, or that he's on a journey, or meditating, or he's sleeping.
Yeah, you gotta wake him up, or maybe he's on a trip, and you gotta. Yeah, it's good stuff.
So then it's Elijah's turn, and
now you got to remember we're about 550 years from Moses at this point. We've read all this real quick, but there has been 550 years past, and now you've got a group of people, especially in the north. They're now second or third king into this, and they don't have the word of God daily in their life like the people in Judah or previous generations.
Yeah.
So that they're not talking. They're waiting to see who wins here.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And he has to repair the altar. This is one of the things that Getch points out. He has to repair because they have not used it.
Yeah.
They've used the altar for Baal, but not the one. And he has them to fill the trench with water 3 times. And
during a drought.
Yeah. Getch mentions this. It's probably their drinking water, right? Because why would you... It's their drinking water that they have, because it's not
they're
just
on top of a mountain.
It's not just a little hike. It is a legitimate mountain. And so they do it. They fill the trench 3 times, pretty much just...
pour over the offering. Yeah, over everything.
Soaks the entire altar. And in verse... he prays to the Lord, and in verse 38 is the for me... Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt sacrifice, and the wood, and the stones, and the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. Consumed everything. Not just started a fire and made this. He consumed everything. And now the people are afraid, and Elijah doesn't take pity on them and goes and...
Yeah, the people say, the Lord, he is the God. The Lord, he is the God. They say that twice. And they go and kill the 450 prophets of Baal.
Yeah, waste no time there.
When we were, I've had the opportunity a few years to teach the Awana Truth and Training kids when they do an outdoor event once a year at a bonfire. And the very first year I did it, your Uncle Ron helped me. There used to be the barn still there as well. And we had gone and set up this fire pit, and I just doused it with gasoline. I mean, it was just, so it was ready to go. And we ran a string.
Not water.
Yeah, we ran a string from there back to the barn with a firecracker type thing, bottle rockets. And so I'm teaching this story. And I get to the point where he says to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Isaac, I think it says Israel there, and Ron lit that, and it went, shoo, and it lit the fire, and it came up, and it was so cool.
That's very cool.
I got that from Cloyd Baker's dad. Used to do that. He used to douse a full rope though in kerosene, and he'd sit up in a tree and light it when it would go down. I was like, oh, we've got to do this.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was cool. So. At the end of this is interesting. There is no more of a mountaintop experience than this. And verses 42 through 46, Elijah, he's tired. Verse 40, it says he sits down, puts his head down between his knees. He's whooped. Verse 42, he tells the king rain's is going to come. And then in verse 46, he sends the king back to Samaria, and he's in his chariot, or I think it was chariot.
Yeah.
And Elijah's given the supernatural strength to outrun him back to Samaria. So he is now just completely exhausted as we get into 19. And we get to see this. If there's a chapter that applies to us as Christians that are serving the Lord, that this is the chapter. chapter 19.
It starts off with seeing the wickedness of Jezebel.
Yeah.
Because after hearing what God did on Mount Carmel, right?
Yeah, Mount
Mount Carmel, she still wants to kill Elijah for killing her prophets.
Oh, yes, she does.
Yeah.
So yeah, because now she's losing power. I mean, so go ahead.
So then Elijah flees and he goes under a juniper tree.
He goes 80 miles to Bathsheba.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Beersheba.
Is it Beersheba or Bathsheba?
Beersheba.
Beersheba. Let me change my notes.
So, and he asked the Lord to kill him, right? Because he's no better than his ancestors.
Yeah, he is just physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, he is just spent. I got a quote from Spurgeon I thought that was really applicable here. Elijah failed in the very point at which he was the strongest. And that is where most men fail. In Scripture, it is the wisest man who proves himself to be the greatest fool. Just as the meekest man, Moses, spoke hasty and bitter words. Abraham failed in his faith, Job in his patience. So he, who was the most courageous of all men, speaking of Elijah here, fled from an angry woman. And that's where we see him.
Yeah, and so God sends an angel again. He's at the end of 18, it says, and the hand of the Lord was on Elijah. And then you see this with sending an angel to feed him with hot food.
Yeah, 2 times it gives him water and food. And he's able to stay, I don't know what kind of food this was. He's able to go 40 days without drinking or eating with this.
To Mount Horeb.
Which is 200 miles north from where he was. So there's 2 things there. One is he has the strength. The second is God gives him some time. 40 days to go 200 miles, that's a lot of time. So God's given him time to restore and to...
Yeah.
And we get then to the famous cave where Elijah, he shares his mind with God. I feel alone. I've been zealous or busy for you, Lord. Jealous, I think, is the word he uses there.
Yeah.
And they want to kill me. And, basically, why is this happening to me? And God says, what doest thou here, Elijah? And he responds. God then goes into this where he shows an earthquake.
Strong wind.
Yeah, wind, earthquake, then fire. It says God's not in any of those. And then he speaks in this still small voice. For me, I look at that, mountaintop experiences are there, but it's not in those. It's in the listening to God and following the Lord in our daily walk. Those are great, but that's not where it's always at. It's did you have any more with that?
Yeah, just the still part when you're after big mountaintops and experiences and stuff like that. It's the smaller things where God can then speak to you, sometimes even more than the mountaintops.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I would point one other thing. I think we've already maybe mentioned this in a week past, but expect something to occur after a mountaintop experience. I know we've talked about this before,
I've
but
definitely brought that up.
Yeah. So here's this mountaintop of Mount Carmel situation. Great victory for the Lord. And then Jezebel comes in and steals all that away.
Right away.
Right away. And so I'm not always telling us to be looking over our shoulders, but don't be surprised when it does happen. Interesting. He asks him again at the end of that, what doest thou here, Elijah? After explaining all this in the still small voice, and he gets the same response from Elijah. I'm not sure he completely understood that yet, of what God was trying to say there. But God gives him a final job. He's to set up a new king in Syria and Israel, which we'll find actually happens through Elisha. And he replaces, here's your replacement, Elisha.
And then we see Elisha dropping everything and coming to follow Elijah.
Yeah, that's cool. Verses 19 through 21 with Elisha. He puts his mantle over him, says, "Come on." And Elisha's,
He's ready to go.
he takes the instruments that he used to plow with, his livelihood, and he uses those to burn the sacrifice. There's no going back. I mean, that's like burning the bridges behind you. You can't go back. And that's really cool to see.
Very cool. And now we're into the last chapter of Friday, chapter 20.
Yeah.
And it starts Ahab and his battles against Syria.
Right.
And Ben-Hadad besieges the city of Samaria. And the Lord delivers them into the hands of Ahab.
Right. First thing, I think Ben-Hadad might be a title.
Oh, okay.
Versus, now some people say it might
like
have
a
been the
pharaoh
same
thing?
guy, or it might have just been like a family title.
So it's like Pharaoh
Yeah, could have been.
or Caesar.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so Syria's threatening to attack, and Ahab, he's about to capitulate and give them what they want, and the elders say, no, 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 no. And God sends somebody and says, no, 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 go take them on. And I think the only reason, it tells us there, what verse is that? Verse 23, the only reasons is because they're mocking God. And
Yeah, in 13, and thou shalt know that I am the Lord. He's wanting to establish that
Right.
he is the Lord here.
And then verse 23, and the servants of the king of Syria said unto him, their gods are gods of the hills. Therefore, because they just beat them they just lost in the hills. Therefore, they were stronger than we. But let us fight against them in the plain, and surely we shall be stronger than they. So God says, no, 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 no.
Yeah.
And this was more to Syria than it was to Israel.
Yeah.
And Ahab's able to do this. But
But
then Ahab messes up. Go ahead.
Yeah, he doesn't kill Ben-Hadad or whoever that was.
Yeah.
And he's punished for not killing him. And the prophet says that because you didn't kill him, now your life is the payment for your disobedience.
Yeah, and he does it in quite dramatic fashion.
It's very dramatic.
Yeah, it's verses 35 through 43. We'll let you enjoy that.
Yeah.
All right.
Now we're into Saturday, the last two chapters, right? The last two chapters of First Kings.
First Kings. Naboth's vineyard.
Yeah, so we got 21 through 22. And again, we see the wickedness of Jezebel.
Yeah.
Ahab wants Naboth's vineyard.
It's like right next to his property, and he's like, "Oh, that's a nice vineyard. I really want that. Will you let me buy it, or I'll trade you for another vineyard?" And he's, "I'm not giving you my inheritance. This is my family's inheritance."
And while Ahab is pouting about it, he's basically pouting.
Yeah, he was.
Jezebel determines that she will get it for him.
Yeah,
and
she's, "Dost thou not govern the kingdom of Israel? Aren't you the king?"
Oh, gosh.
And of course, she had that accent.
Yeah, of course. You sounded just like her. And so she comes up with this plan, this wicked, wicked plan to get it for him. And she writes letters under Ahab's name. It specifies this, and seals it under his seal and sends it to the elders to falsely accuse Naboth and for treason, basically.
Yeah,
and
just has the dude killed. And they all go ahead with it.
Yeah, because it was from the king.
Well, but the king says, set him up so I can kill him. And sure enough, he does.
Stoned to death. And
so, but Elijah's the one Elijah holds Ahab accountable for this. God comes to him in verses 17 through 26, and Ahab's the one that's going to get punished, not her. He's the king, and God holds him accountable. But then we see one of the most interesting turns, and this shows the character of God. In verses 27 through 29, Ahab repents. And
well, before that, in 25,
go ahead.
In 25, it again says that Ahab was the most wicked. There was none like unto Ahab, which did sell himself to work wickedness in the sight of the Lord. And then at the end it says, whom Jezebel, his wife, stirred up.
Yeah.
And then you see this thing where,
right,
this twist in Ahab's life.
So Ahab actually repents of what he just did, and God postpones the judgment and pushes it off to, it's not going to happen in your generation, it's going to happen in your sons. Kingdom's going to be taken at that point. Now you're still going to die. That part doesn't change.
Yeah.
But the other part is going to get pushed off. So then we get to the last chapter, and we see Ahab's death.
Yeah.
So here we're introduced to Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat is a king of
Judah
that is a man that follows the Lord. But we're going to see this dude has bad judgment. I mean, he just doesn't.
Yeah, he joins Ahab in a battle against Ramoth.
Yeah. Ahab's
right
like,
away.
hey, you want to, they've made peace with each other. He's like, why don't you come with me to battle? He doesn't, why fight in this battle? He has nothing to gain from this.
Yeah.
So there's this whole now, let's see what the prophets say. So the prophets of Baal come in and they tell Ahab exactly what he wants to hear. And we'll see now Jehoshaphat does this twice. He asks, is there not here a prophet of the Lord? Yeah, there's one.
But in verse 8 it says, there is one, but I hate him.
Yeah, he doesn't give me what I want to hear. He hates me.
Micaiah.
Yeah. So eventually, verse 13 through 28, Micaiah comes and he mocks him. He's like, oh, yeah, do whatever you want to do. Yeah, you want to go? Yeah, you should definitely go. And then he finally tells him a real prophecy. And he's like, you can just see him. See what I told you? The dude hates me. That kind of, it is sort of funny.
I was laughing.
So he allows, basically he just says, this is what's going to happen. Now verses 20 through 22, that is an odd set of verses. And the Lord said, who shall persuade Ahab that he may go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? Because he's going to die there. And one said of this matter, and another said of that matter, on that matter. And there came forth a spirit and stood before the Lord and said, I will persuade him. And the Lord said unto him, wherewith? And he said, I will go forth, and I will be a lying spirit in the mouth of all the prophets. That he said, thou shalt persuade him, and prevail also, go forth and do so. Now that's an odd set of verses. So is this an angel, or was this one of the demons, the fallen angels? My opinion, it's a fallen angel. He wants to do this. He wants to go to this battle. He's already been proclaimed that he's going to die. And at this point, God says, okay, go ahead. And who's going to go do it? And God allows this demon
Spirit,
to go and do this. It's just a spirit there. We don't know for sure.
Yeah.
And then there's this whole thing between him and another prophet. But so Ahab then, he knows he's going to die. He's told this. So he goes into this battle. What's Jehoshaphat thinking here?
I don't know.
Ahab says, okay, I'm going to disguise myself. They're not going to know I'm king. But you
dress up as me.
Yeah. Well, you just dress up as a king, yeah. Jehoshaphat's like, okay, yeah, let's go. What's going through the dude's mind?
It doesn't make sense.
So sure enough, the Syrians are like, okay,
there's Ahab.
Go after the king.
Yeah.
And they start pursuing after him, and he's like, ah! And they realize after he's crying out, that it's not Ahab. And we get to this part, and at verse 34, and a certain man drew a bow at a venture, just randomly, and smote the king of Israel. So God is going to accomplish his will anyway. He could have made the wheel fall off his chariot. He could have anything. And he just let this dude just randomly just shoot.
He probably didn't even know he got him.
He might not have even known. And the king dies, and his blood is
licked up by dogs.
In the exact field where God said it was going to occur back in chapter 21.
So then Ahaziah then becomes the king of Israel,
which is Ahab's son.
And we get a little bit of a glimpse of Jehoshaphat
back down in the south, Judah,
and how he walked with the Lord. Then we see Jehoram.
25 years he's reigned in the south.
Yeah. And then we see a recap of Ahab and his son's reign. Go ahead.
So Jehoshaphat dies. Now this is important. Jehoshaphat dies, and after 25 years, he's not going to be dead yet. They're just giving a future. And he will have a son named Jehoram that will reign. Now, don't get confused. The northern kingdom is going to have a guy with the same name in just a little bit. Okay? So then we drop. So that's in the south. We go back up into the north, and Ahaziah reigns for 2 years and does evil.
But in verse 42, again, it says, and walked in the way of his father and in the way of his mother.
Yeah.
The evil.
Yeah.
It says that every time.
She
that
will
it
come
wasn't
back.
Just Ahab.
She will come back to haunt even more here. So now we're into 2 Kings.
We're into
1 through
Sunday.
3.
Sunday.
Yeah.
We have the first 3 chapters of 2 Kings. And Moab hears that Ahab is dead. And apparently this is the political stuff where they were afraid of him.
Yeah, yeah.
And so now that he's dead, it's kind of like when David was weaning and like people wanted to attack.
Yeah, they were having to give sheep and all kinds of stuff to him, and now paying tribute, and now they don't have. They're like, we're going to rebel against his son.
Yeah. So Ahaziah then falls. It says, I don't fully understand. Through a lattice in his upper chamber.
Yeah. So there's some like house where there's a lattice, and he falls and basically like falling over the railing or something like that,
okay.
and he
gets sick.
He's hurt. Yeah. So
okay.
he sends a prophet. He sends servants to go talk to the prophet of Baal, and see if I'm going to survive. And while they're on the way,
the Lord then tells Elijah to go and talk to him.
It's like, what in the world? Is the God of Israel not here? Go back and tell him, no, you're going to die.
Yeah. So Ahaziah is not happy about this, about Elijah. So he then sends 3 groups of 50 people to go and capture him. And this is where you see the description in verse 8, where he's described as a hairy man and girt with a girdle of leather about his loins. So he's an outdoorsman through and through.
So he's up on this hillside, this low mountain, and God says, go ahead.
That description, if you look at the description of John the Baptist, it's very similar, which is why they think that he might have been Elijah reincarnated.
Reincarnated is not the right word, but you know what we meant.
Yeah.
So Elijah's up there, and I'm a prophet of God. Fire's going to come down. Boom, 50 gone.
Consumes.
The next 50. Boom, fire takes him. The third time, the guy's like, please, he's down on it. You just see the dude, please don't kill us.
Dude.
And God tells him to go ahead. And he goes down, and he tells him he's going to die. Mm-hmm. So verses 17 and 18, Ahaziah dies. He doesn't have an heir. So his brother, another son, named Jehoram. So now we have a Jehoram in the north and a Jehoram in the south. Well, Jehoram in the south isn't there yet. He'll be there in a little bit. But
and then in chapter 2...
Before that, did you notice, I have no symbolism for this at all, but did you notice how many things with Elijah happened in threes? Like he stretches himself upon the kid three times. This is 3 times. There's 2 or 3 other things that happen 3 times.
He puts water on it 3 times.
Yeah. Somebody can tell.
Yeah.
I don't think anything you could say there, I don't think is going to be positive, but it's very interesting.
So then we meet Elisha. Well, no, we get more of Elisha. We already met him, but the passing of the torch between Elijah to Elisha.
I learned something new in this time that I had not seen before.
So Elisha takes up his mantle, and we see Elijah does not die. Right?
Yeah. So the beginning of the chapter, you're meeting all these folks, and they're saying, "Hey." They're talking to Elisha. Your master's leaving today. He's going to go, yeah, I know. And he sticks close to him. He won't leave Elijah's side. It happens 2 or 3 times there. And he won't leave Elijah's side. I don't know if he doesn't want to lose him, if he wants... And the verse,
you don't ever want to lose,
Yeah. And so then you see a guy that's, in my opinion, devoted to him. Does he not have confidence? I don't know, because we're going to see confidence in a few minutes. They get to verse 8. It's finally time for this to occur, and Elijah takes his mantle, slaps the water, and the water parts, and they walk across on dry land, and they go, just the 2 of them. And verse 9, Elijah says, what do you want from me? And he says, I want a double portion of your spirit, which actually occurs, because when we see this, there's 2 times the amount of miracles that Elisha does than Elijah does. Now, here's the thing that...
Does Elijah do 3 miracles?
Huh?
I don't know. Going back to the 3.
Oh, no, he does more than 3.
Okay.
But in Deuteronomy 21, this might be more than just asking for double the amount of things. Asking for the double portion, your firstborn got the double portion. So maybe this was more of like a father-son type thing. Would I be your firstborn? Will I be your successor?
Mm.
He's asking to be his successor. I don't know if that's true, but that makes a little more sense to me as I've thought about this. Asking to let this, because he didn't have to be just because he was a follower of that. Now, God had said that earlier. Excuse me. But it didn't say that it had to be that way. The people didn't obviously know that. So this chariot and horse of fire come and separates the two, and the whirlwind takes Elijah up, and he cries out, "My father, my father," which is interesting because when he dies, the king says the exact same thing in 2 Kings 13 about him. So he asks this question, where is the Lord God of Elijah? And at that point, he picks up the mantle and he shows. He slaps the water parts, and he goes across on dry land. And we see him with this instant courage and boldness of ministry. And he heals the waters of Jericho, and we get the famous verses of 23 and 25. Go ahead.
So I did a lesson while I was in Awana about respecting your elders, and this was
Yeah?
This was
I
the
remember that. I
passage.
remember that.
It's recorded. We have the video of it somewhere, but now that I'm bald, it's even funnier. So Elisha must have been bald.
Or less hairy than Elijah.
Yeah. So these
Yeah.
youths
It says children, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're mocking Elisha for being bald and saying, "Go up, thou bald man, go up, thou bald man." And so Elisha curses them, and 2 she-bears come out and eat 42 of them.
Mauls them, yeah.
Mauls them. So
Yeah. They were disrespecting God's anointed, possibly mocking the ministry and the Lord as well. So,
just being bald, it's
yeah.
funny.
He didn't take kindly to it.
He
though.
did not. No, I don't care.
I think it has to be more than just you insulted me. I think it has to be you were insulting
Yeah.
the position of Godhead there.
Someone like that probably doesn't care that he's actually bald.
Yeah,
It's just not.
It is a comical story, though.
Yeah. So chapter 3, last chapter. Jehoram is now the king of Israel.
Yeah, so we're back in the north.
And he is evil in the sight of the Lord, but not. It specifies that he was not as bad as his parents, and again as his parents.
Yeah.
Again mentions Jezebel.
Yeah, it says that he put away Baal. So this is why he's not as evil.
Yeah.
So there's a difference between fully following after Baal and this mediocre sort of
that Jeroboam was doing.
Yeah, exactly. This is an I've done this lesson. I did this lesson out with the kids too.
Yeah.
We dug a pit and had water come up in the pit. Didn't work so well, but we tried.
Because Israel, Judah, and Edom ally against Moab, because Moab's coming. They ally together.
Yeah, so they had, as we said before, after Ahab died, Moab quit paying their tribute. So he decides, Jehoram, like, "Hey, Jehoshaphat, will you join me again?" Once again, Jehoshaphat's joining in on a fight.
Sure.
He's not dead yet. So he joins in this fight, and they go south, so they invite Edom to go with them. So if you're looking at the country, you've got the Jordan River, you've got Israel on one side and Moab on the other. So they decide to go down around the Dead Sea and hit the Moabites over here. So to do that means they have to go through Edom, which is desert. And they didn't think this through very much because it's a 7-day journey with their army, and they don't have any water.
Yeah, so Elisha performs a miracle of providing that.
Yeah, and he says the only reason I'm doing this is because Jehoshaphat's with you. If Jehoshaphat wasn't with you, you could all just die out here in the desert. I don't care. And
He also prophesies a victory here.
yeah.
Yeah, and which happens.
Yeah. So he says, dig some pits. So dig these big pits, and the water fills the pits. And the Moabites, you know how like when you look down sometimes and there's like a different color when you see water, or like in the summertime and you see the stuff come off. Well, they look down and the water looks red. So they think it's blood. They think the three kings were fighting against each other and killing each other. So they're like, let's go. So they go down there and they wind up just killing the Moabites. And the worst thing is, the last verse of this, hate to end on this, but the last verse, the Moabite king, he's wanting victory. So in his pagan religion, he offers his son as an opportunity for his God to give them victory. And obviously he doesn't, and they wind up losing the battle. And it's just horrible sight of what's going on there at that time. So that's where we're at.
That's where we're at, and then we'll finish up 2 Kings. We'll get most of 2 Kings done next week. So
we'll keep doing this Israel, Judah, and we'll try to make sure we specify, because it just keeps going like this.
Yeah, the next few weeks are going to be like that, because then we get into Chronicles, which is.
And I'll talk about maybe some of the dating methods there next time too, so that it might help you if you're into that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Hey, did you hear there is a new law in Hawaii that you're not allowed to laugh out loud?
Oh, really?
Yeah. It has to be aloha. I have a joke.
He got the joke this time. I hope you enjoyed it.
That's terrible.
I knew it was coming too. You set it up better than me. That was good. All right, continue reading. Stay in the Word of God. Stay strong. This 16th week, we got.
This is good stuff. This is great.
I've thoroughly enjoyed this.
As you get into the Kings, so Chronicles will rehash some of this. So
gives
it'll
more details.
Yeah, it gives you detail. It'll strengthen what you just read, and then we get into the poetry section after that. Well, no, not quite yet, but we a couple books, and then we'll be in the poetry section. So that'll be great. Love you guys. Have a good day.
See ya.